Good morning. It's been exciting times for the last two sessions that we're part of to see what all things are happening. I think the Titan presentation was just excellent and a lot of ideas we as panelists have kind of captured. Also, Madam Chairperson of the National Commission of Women, that was also quite exciting. What we are actually going to dwell into is the aspects of culture. But before we actually dive into that, we just wanted to share some context. I just want to share some context with you all. Whilst it's important and everyone understands the business benefits, the impact of diversity in an organization, what happens if we don't have diversity, and what happens if we have diversity. This aspect of how it helps in building kind of the creativity, the kind of perspective, the different perspectives that are there within the organization, which in fact then help us to drive the organization in a very different and a better fashion. But before we actually dive deep into that, we wanted to actually understand and what are the different elements of diversity as well. I think one of the key components of diversity, therefore, is that how do I actually build a culture which is helping propagate and helping to actually build diversity in organizations. And that's going to be a key part of the deliberation that we are going to have as a panel. And also look at innovative practices the organizations are bringing forth to the table to actually help understand as practitioners what exactly is diversity development, what are some of the companies doing in the retail and other spaces to actually build, increase, and kind of enhance the entire diversity agenda. But before we dive deep into the cultural elements and the importance of how leadership, etc., can play a very, very significant role, we want to understand certain nuts and bolts of our diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I invite Narendra Sharan to actually help us demystify the whole aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion, what it exactly stands for, because there are various things which are floating out there, but we just wanted to actually lay the ground understanding for all of us and actually then start off from there. So what is Sharan as to what's your perspective on this particular aspect?
Thank you, Adhir, and a very good morning to all of you. I think all our previous speakers, spoke about this subject, and therefore I'm not going to repeat what they have said. But I think what's important that we all are talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. It's becoming, a buzzword in the HR fraternity, in the corporate sector, and so on and so forth. But I think what we need to understand is why we are talking this subject. What is beneath? And I think, to my mind, the subject is related to subject of discrimination. Subject is related to, a mindset of, or discriminatory mindset, biases, prejudices, which is inflicting us all the time. I'll give you maybe not a very related example, but just an example that, we all believe that the skin, the white color skin, is better than the brown color skin. From where this mindset has come? Who has decided that? Why we think that Gora is better than Savala? I think if we go into the subject of all the discrimination which is happening, we need to understand the answer to that is equity. We need to be fair. Equity simply means that we need to be fair. We need to be providing justice to all the discrimination which is happening. And that's why, the subject of equity, inclusion, and diversity is happening. Now, Many of the earlier speakers spoke about, people with disability, women participation, even, as CEO. Uh, you know, even this year, Adhir, I think many of the audience may be knowing that this year Nobel Prize of Economics has gone to a lady called Claudia Goldin. And she has worked on the subject of labor force participation, women labor force participation in the US. It has been very, very low. And she has just come into simple conclusion, which I think many of the speakers spoke about, that we don't have to always question the nature of women. We need to question the nature of work. Every time we try to fit the woman for the kind of work which we have decided or designed in the last 100 years, the time has come that we need to start questioning about, is 8 hours coming every day in the office is the right way to look at why women should only be doing the caregiving for their children and parents, why men cannot take that part. Some of these basic questions she has asked, and she has answered at, she has got a Nobel Prize for that. But I think very simple argument that unless and until we start looking at, the whole nature of work, we cannot answer the question why women labor force participation is very less in the US or in that matter in India also. So diversity, inclusion, and equity is very important. To my mind, equity comes first. If we address equity, we will address inclusion. If we address inclusion, the diversity will be the outcome. So in my mind, I think the sequence of change of mindset begin with equity, then it goes to inclusion, and then we get diversity, as an outcome. Adhir, to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mr. Sharan. I think going beyond this, let's understand a few aspects from Taruna also, in terms of what do you actually understand by diversity beyond gender, and how do you actually bring that to the fore, and what are some of the practices that some of the organizations are doing, and especially in your case IKEA is doing, to actually bring that to the fore, diversity as an element beyond the gender diversity that we talk about. What's your perspective on that?
Thanks, Adhir, for the question, and thanks for having IKEA here. We are humbled to be part of this forum and sharing and learning at the same time. So thank you so much for inspiring us. I think diversity in very simple terms is just being embracing everybody and everything, as long as it's a value add to whatever is your objective with which you are driving, or wherever your organization stands in terms of the vision and mission. Gender is quite a lot spoken as compared to all the other forms of diversity. But then if we bring in inclusion as an aspect, then I believe it is important for us to look at diversity in totality, not only one from a gender perspective, because I think then probably we are skewing again a little bit. And the problem that we are trying to solve today with regards to gender diversity will be another problem that we'll have to solve in the next few years by the time we balance between male, female, gender diversity, yeah. Some of the things that we do, we embrace diversity in the way it comes. Our objective is very clear. If you have the skill, you have the potential to perform, you have ability and your desire to become part of IKEA's journey, then that's the place for you to be. And that's how we write our job ads, that's how we all stay committed. From my first coworker on the ground to my CEO of the company, all of us talk the same language. We ensure that we practice that in all our ways of living within the organization. And one example that I can share to empower all the coworkers and all the processes that we have is, if I do not see diversity within a training session or a leadership training session, we cancel those sessions. Till the time we don't come back with a forum which is having diverse candidature in that training forum. This is to ensure that we are ingraining this, not by just saying, by putting it in an action, and calling it out as a reason as to why we are not doing, because you do not have this diversity in it. Our succession plans get reviewed. We review our annual performance ratings to see, do we see any unconscious bias unknowingly getting into it when we look at the ratings given to, for example, in case of gender, to male co-workers versus female co-workers, and then go back and question that on whys and why not. And I think IKEA, just like all the other organizations, is trying to live this reality to see if we are able to bring that balance. But it requires this commitment starting from the CEO or the leadership, and then going down to every co-worker in the organization.
Any other specific practices that you have to build diverse kind of nature of the workforce in your recruiting or management practices that you follow, besides what you mentioned just now?
Yes, so I think equality also comes to us quite naturally, other than just promoting very keen eye on all the HR practices, starting from recruitment to everything else within the organization. We also have equal benefits for everybody to be absolutely inclusive. For example, paternity leave is the same as maternity. Everybody has 6 months. The reason being, a male co-worker would have a partner who would like to resume back work in their organization, so who's going to take care of the child? So we no longer call it a maternity day or a maternity leave, we call it parental leave, applicable to all the co-workers. We do not celebrate Women's Day, but we celebrate Equality Day, because we say that this is for everybody. The benefits are the same. For example, everybody flies economy. Doesn't matter whether you are the first co-worker on the ground or the leadership team in the company. Insurance coverage is the same. This time around, we have also gone a step ahead to have gender reaffirmation surgeries, etc., become a part of insurance policy, just to ensure that we are going step forward. But we still believe that it's just a journey. There's so much more to be done. And of course, ensuring that succession planning, the leadership trainings, all of these have equal nomination and participation from all forms of life within the organization.
Thanks. I think some excellent practices shared by you. I think must appreciate what you guys are doing. But turning over to Sharan again, I think from a culture perspective, you kind of laid down the ground in terms of equity, but from a culture perspective, how does an organization bring forth the equity that is much needed in the organization? And what necessarily needs to be done at a leadership sponsorship level to bring that equity? Because that's an important element we ought to kind of address, answer as well. So certain specific practices and with a focus on the culture aspect, how to bring equity.
Yeah, so thank you, Adhir. I think culture simply means that, a specific value attribute we get embedded into the organization, and people, embody that value when on a day-to-day basis, when they are taking decision making and all. So I have got 3 recommendations for how we can, embed the culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion. First is the leadership commitment. I think personally, my personal experience has been, and we are working, Shreyas is here, Archana is here, we are working at Tata Group apex level. And we have experienced that unless and until it's a full commitment from the top, nothing happens. The policy doesn't matter, your articulation, talking doesn't matter. So the CEOs and the CXO have to be on board on this subject. They have to be fully committed to the cause of DEI. That's the first, I think, recommendation I'll make. If any of the, my personal experience has been that many CEOs are still, they are too much focused on many other things, top line, bottom line, and so on and so forth. And they are not focusing on the subject, which is extremely important for today's discussion, DEI. So the first is leadership commitment. The second is the sensitization. I think sensitization of the leaders and sensitization of, entire across the organization about this subject. I think not many people are aware that how discriminatory they are. And I'll give you one example. Very recently we had a small workshop at Tata Motors, almost 200 people out there, maybe 150 male and 50 female. And I just asked them the question that, do you have all of them are having a joint account today at this point of time in their bank? The financial, I'm talking about the financial decision making. Just raise your hand that at some point of time, this joint account will only be owned by the spouses of the people who are sitting in the hall. Can you just imagine that today the joint account is not the joint account and it is owned by your spouse? I think hardly 2 or 3 people just raised their hand, because that shows the mindset, all of us, that even if it is joint account, my joint account along with my wife, but I don't want to give my power to my wife when it comes to the financial decision making. And that is, layer. It's the power, or it's the fear of losing power which is preventing me to take that decision. And I think when we are talking about culture building, so sensitization is very, very important part. So like we are doing today, I think this kind of a seminar, this kind of a conversation, it's very important. Leadership commitment, sensitization, and the third is the process and systems to ensure that even the small practices are getting recognized by the organization. So again, it's a part of the leadership commitment, but I think organization, it should be visible that, when some good things are being done for equality and for equity, I think they are getting recognized by the organization. So I think if these 3 things are done, small things, I'm not talking about, making a major change, but small steps at a time, leadership engagement, the sensitization of the people throughout the year, across length and breadth of the organization, and a proper reward and recognition for DEI. I think if these 3 things are done, we have seen that many companies have accelerated this whole idea and culture building on the DEI.
Thanks, Narendra, again. I think great points on the culture building aspects. We clearly pointed out the 3 elements that you spoke about. Just turning our attention to something which is from an external perspective, from an ecosystem perspective. I want to just turn over to Lalit, therefore. Lalit, what do you think what are the kind of laws that are existing within our Indian context which actually promote this aspect of diversity, and what needs to be done more in terms of reinforcing the aspects of diversity as well? So if you can throw some light on this aspect, but this is seldom, which is not discussed in forums, but typically if you can throw light on that, it will be helpful for our participants as well.
Yeah, see, the laws have a very, very pivotal role to play over time to influence the culture of the organization as well. For example, to start with Indian Constitution, we have right to equality that starts with Article 14 to Article 18. Article 14 says the state will ensure equality among all its citizens. Then Article 16 says about equality in employment, regardless sex, religion, everything, that kind of thing. Then Article 17 says abolition of untouchability. That is something which is the first article which speaks about inclusiveness. And India's first law against untouchability came in 1956. And 1976, the name was changed to Civil Rights Act. So that is the first thing we started with. And another, which is again another act which has got a relation with right to equality, is Equal Remuneration Act, 1976. And it took about 29 years to bring that law. when I was a child in 70s, in my primary school, there were questions in mathematics that a male worker gets 2 rupees 50 paise per day of work, a female worker gets 2 rupees. And it got removed when I was teaching maths to my daughter. Okay, so by that time, the Equal Remuneration Act had come, and but still, in a lot of unorganized sectors, this disparity still exists, even after 50 years of that law having been enacted. Now, we have SC/ST, Atrocities Act, which is not applicable to private sector, but in the sense it is applicable to private sector. Thing is, there are cases where atrocities happen. We have come across one case, and it is in one of the away cities where it happened. And for example, let us take Maternity Benefit Act. That is another example. So recently, the maternity leave has been extended to 6 months. But there is something called a provision of creche. Now, let me come to this. It says that any organization which has got 50 or more employees has to provide a creche, any establishment. It is absolutely difficult for any retail store. Many retail stores employ more than 50 people. And it's difficult actually. And probably that is one of the reasons why none of the states have really implemented it, though the act came in 2017. Then another law which is a bit preventive. For example, we have Minimum Wages Act. So if you are engaging a person for whole 8 hours, then you pay certain minimum wages. But if you are engaging him or her for less, you cannot pay less. If you are engaging for 5 hours, you cannot give equivalent pay for 5 hours, because the lawmakers thought that it could lead to exploitation. And that is the reason the part-timers employment, which is again in terms of diversity of employment, part-timer is one of the employment models. But that has not been legalized so far because there could be exploitation. So that fear really exists. But in our retail sector, part-timers really play a big role. And when we talk about, say, ethical and legal, probably it is ethical to employ a part-timer today, but it is not legal to employ a part-timer today. We employ, all of us employ actually, but legally it doesn't have a standing today. So these are the things which, then let us come to the creche. Again, I told about creche. One good thing what government, this law said, that 50 employees, it didn't speak about 50 female employees. There, they, that unconscious bias, the law has sought to remove that. So it says that even a male can probably rear the child as much as a lady could. So that is how there are certain things which are facilitative, certain things which are restrictive. And since this is a body, which is a collective body of all of us, then these are the areas where we can really probably influence the government, that these are the areas we need to really look at.
So, as a follow-up question, if I may ask you, what are some of the ethical considerations that we should have which should guide in implementation of DEI as a process in retail industry? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, one is, like I told, ethical, there could be some kind of conflict between what is ethical, what is legal. Like I gave an example of part-timers. But what is important is we need to be absolutely equity-based. There should be transparency in our actions. And most of the times, there is an issue of discrimination. You can trace it back to the manager. the way he has dealt with people. If you don't have respect, you don't have equity, you don't have fairness, this kind of problems comes. And therefore, a lot of ethical issues which are, there are a lot of, feelings or perception of being discriminated that comes from the behavior that the leaders have in the organization, particularly in a micro organization like a store. In a far off place, you many times the store manager is the all and all, and there is nobody to supervise him on an everyday basis. And therefore, how really you bring that balance and sensitize them, that really helps us reduce this kind of issues like discrimination, unfairness, those kind of things basically.
Thank you, Lalit. I think, turning over to Taruna, I think one of the questions that is, of course, you mentioned a few of the practices earlier. Are there any more very specific practice you want to share? Also, the other larger question, which may not necessarily be to do with retail alone, but does the DI practices within the organization have impact on society, or likewise, or which is the reverse of, if the society is more diverse, it has impact here on the practices here in the organization?
Yeah, great question. So the reason we say all the three terms DEI together is because all of them complement each other, and if one of them is not working in conjunction or complementing the others, then I don't think we'll be able to have the balance. By writing or talking about some of the practices that I mentioned, it's okay for us to get diversity, for example, during recruitment process. But what happens when you bring in diversity and you don't allow it to flourish? That's when you have things like inclusion, that's when you have things like how do you bring about equality, and not necessarily meaning that everything has to be seen. So equality has to be understood in a specific context when we talk about ED&I. One of the other things that we do is GEP corrections or gender equal pay. That doesn't mean that I get 1 rupee and the other person gets 1 rupee, but it means the equal work and equal pay. Of course, we have the range within which it will sit, but then GEP also allows us to flourish the diversity that we have brought in, and also to see how we can be more inclusive. We do allow for different type of contracts to exist within the organization. This is to support you and your personal life depending on wherever you are. So if you are somebody who wants to do higher education, or if you are somebody returning to work and you need some adjustments with your work timings, then we have different type of work contracts that flourish fantastically and also supports the business at the same time. Co-workers coming back from maternity leave are given phased assimilation within the system. For example, I'm coming back from maternity. I don't need to be 100% the very next day at work. I can do it in phases, doing 50% and then 75% and then 100%. So immersion is a little slower, giving me an opportunity to balance. We provide daycare facility for all the co-workers. And at the same time, we also have a small land or a kids playing place in all our stores, which allows the customers who are coming in to then have their children on one side and supporting them in whatever decisions they want to make. And it of course supports business as well as, allows for a family time. Does it have an impact on the society? In two ways, yes. One, when we do these practices within the organization, we are creating more empowered co-workers to go back and be brand ambassadors within their society, within the community around them to talk about it. Is this an easy balance to maintain or get? Of course not. But is it a right step to take? We believe yes. Because we do see that then as an empowered co-worker, back home I would have a responsibility of a parent or a sibling or any of the other roles that I play in the family. Will I then be able to pass on this information and have more aware citizens tomorrow? Absolutely yes. On the external side, when we get engaged with the community in different agendas, this one being such, or let's say skill building, or going and talking about these causes, I think we create that awareness. Another form that we do is any of the vendor partners who get empaneled with IKEA follow through a very stringent process of I-Way or the IKEA way, which also means that the agenda of driving ED&I is not only within the organization. But the targets that we carry for ourselves, the commitment that we carry for ourselves in the organization is the same thing that follows through the complete supply chain. So everybody has the same commitments of, let's say, 50-50 male-female ratio, embrace all forms of diversity, ensure that you follow ethical practices in reasonably or sensibly sourcing the material for us. And I think this is how we are contributing back to the society in two ways. One, through the co-workers. Second is with all the associations that we have as a part of business or otherwise towards a social cause, that we are able to drive that difference within the community.
Thanks. I think whilst we have coming to close, but I think it's an important part to a segue into actually predicting the future. I know we are actually we are not just there in terms of what we want to do, but typically, and there's a lot of awareness, etc., created across the corporate sector. But there's much more to be done. But sitting where we are today, what do you see some of the trends in the future from a diversity and inclusion perspective that will be upcoming in the future era?
Thank you, Adhir, for the question, and thank you so much for having Tata Starbucks as a part of this lovely, lovely forum. When we talk about retail, we all know that we are a consumer-facing industry, and I feel the responsibility is so much more because we see them every day, and we get feedback every day, and we communicate a message every day to our customers. And I feel it is so, so important to be able to mirror the diversity that we see in our customer base. It is so important to have that diversity in our talent base who are working and serving them. And diversity, to me, it of course goes beyond, geography, communities, gender, abilities, as we talk about. I think the future says, how do you embrace diversity in choices? How do you embrace diversity in preferences? So I'll give you an example. So just like our consumer, for example, there are consumers who want frappuccinos at Starbucks, and there are those who want their core coffee in Americano, and we're there to serve both. Similarly, if I look at the talent landscape today, and we're talking about inclusion here, so there are a set of people who say, I want to see my career grow in F&B retail. And I want to work as a full-timer. We get talent now who say that I want to study, I want to do my college education, I don't want to work full-time, I want to work part-time, include me. We have women who say, I'm busy in the days and I want to do closing shifts, please include me. You have return to work talent who said, I don't want to work fixed hours. I want to work flexible hours, include me. So the question is, how do we reorganize our workflows in a way? How do we look at roles and responsibilities in our retail spaces in a way so that we are able to include them all? A small example, right? I'm going to rewind. So we were in 2014 and we had 16% female representation. And we did everything that, we all do, sensitization workshops, shared goal setting, inclusion, a lot of practices on inclusion, but somewhere we got stuck. We said, hey, we cannot get beyond a 33%, but of course, we want to mirror what we see in our consumer base, which is a 50%. So how do we get there and what's stopping us? And when we went deeper, of course, we realized that, there are state laws that say beyond certain stipulated hours in every state, you have to provide transportation to your females. Right? Now, F&B, we're in a geographically dispersed business, and there's a cost of running that. So we said we need to be creative. What do we do? Because we have to find ways. And then that is when we came up with these all-women store concept, and we said, today we have 26 of those. So we said we look at corporate stores, abbreviated formats, which close early, and let's run them as all-women stores because that frees up the bandwidth in the neighboring stores to be able to hire more females. What we also did was we invested. So we have few transportation routes that run, again, so that, our high streets and the high volume formats as well, we can have women who are doing closing shifts. So everything, I think there's an element of creativity that will be required, and a lot of intent and accountability that will be required in future to be able to ensure that our retail spaces welcome all forms of diversity, diversity of choice. So that's one. I think the second future trend I see is, I think, sustaining, right? All of us are checking the boxes, right? We all have, we are hiring in a way so that we ensure there's female representation. We're looking at gender and holistically now. We're also looking at special abilities. So we are doing those checks. But if we are not intentional about having very, very robust, equity-based development programs for these people, we won't be able to sustain this. So we have, for example, again, signing partners. So our hearing and speech disability partners, we call them signing partners. And it's about how do we ensure that they become coffee champions, they become barista trainers, they're able to train the people who walk in. And this starts, I believe, from bottoms up, right? So there was a report in NASCOM which said worldwide retail, 26% of the board room members are occupied by females. It's much less in India, and that kind of shift is not easy to make, right? So it's much more easier sometimes to build it from bottom up. So the development part is something that I feel needs to be strengthened and required to sustain this in future. And then the third trend, which I feel is, again, when we talk about DEI and we look at our talent space, right? What are we doing here? And all organizations are talking about it. Again, so important to look at it from a 360-degree perspective. Consumers, of course, because we are servicing them, but what about our supplier partners? Do we have diversity there? What about our communities that we serve? Do we have diversity there? So the signing stores that we are talking about, the artwork, for example, that goes in the store, we want to ensure that we have somebody, again, who is from that community, who's able to render that artwork in that store. Communities, of course, we partner with, train her in skilling, and I think since the last 2 years, it's been about 1,000 women last year, and then we are on the journey to support skilling of another 1,000 young women, and then we have 2-3 other partnerships, some partnerships at the grassroots level where we're looking at educating girls from rural sectors. But again, that's addressing the community part of it. So it has to be holistic and they all need to talk to each other. So I think that integration is important, relevant for future, and something we should not lose focus on. So yeah, I think these 3 trends, something that I could think of.
Just a very quick follow-up question in terms of how does DNA actually influence your consumer behavior or the business strategies of the organization? Any thoughts around that?
Yeah. So, of course, we know, especially in retail, right? Especially in retail, we, employ talent from different economic strata, but of course, a lot of them from humble and unprivileged backgrounds, and then things are shifting. We are touching each and every, I would say, segment. To extend that, when I see a customer, and that is not that we have been able to achieve today, how do we have our customers as our partners, right? So all of you seated in this room, I hope, are Starbucks customers. The question is, would you go back and, in your families, if you have, say, your children, a relative, a student, somebody who is growing up, say that, I think you should work in Starbucks as well. So the day we are able to convert our customers to partners, to me, is success. And to be able to do that, every customer that walks in a Starbucks store should feel that pride and say, hey, this is a place where I want to work. This is a place where everybody is treated equally. This is a place where there's no sir, ma'am. I'm addressed by my name. And that resonates with me. With all these interventions, whether it's been signing partners or whether it's been, the all women stores, the community stores as we call them, of course, we get a lot more appreciation from customers. And if today a potential customer has to make a choice between, entering 2 F&B outlets and one has more diversity, they would any day go to the first one. So of course, there's this direct benefit to the business, the customer love and appreciation we get, but I'd again go one step further to say, that inspiration needs to be there so that we are able to convert them to our partners.
Thanks a lot. I think excellent practices. I just thought as a team we would want to open up for some Q&A from the audience now. And this is our chance to actually ask very incisive questions to this esteemed panel. And anyone can probably ask any of the panel members any specific issue around a practice or how do I actually build a culture. So the floor is open for all of us to kind of ask questions to this panel.
Please raise hand.
Yeah, please raise your hands, yeah. I knew that, so I was getting from PS. Nagesh.
I have a very simple question. How do you influence a CEO as a CHRO to adopt some of these practices which is missing in the organization?
How a CHRO can influence the CEO to adopt these practices? Anyone can take?
I could attempt that. Yeah, my CEO is not in the room. He doesn't make my life very difficult, I can tell you, and I work with different sets of CEOs. I'll tell you one shift. So again, I'm going to go back to 2016, and that time we had full-timers working in, female representation wasn't as much. And when we looked at our business, we said that throughout the cycle, there are peaks and there are shoulder peaks. So you don't have, so in some day parts, we have more customers and in the others, we don't. So we said what do we do? And that's when, of course, the part-timer model came into place. So no questions asked, everybody understood the benefits to business. Now, when we looked at talent outside, of course, it was the student crowd, which first came into our mind. A lot of change management happened when we spoke to the deans of the hospitality industry. But we said, okay, we have them, but the attrition is high in that set. And again, the questions came, feedback came, we're not doing this right? And we said, now what do we do? And then we looked at return to work talent. So we all know that women exit because of the 3 M's, marriage, mobility, and maternity. And a lot of them, after they exit, they want to come back, but in part-time roles. And we said, let's look at them. And we focused our efforts around embracing them, and they became a part of that part-timer pool. So what did we achieve? 1, of course, the efficiency to the business. 2, the women representation took a leap. We had people recommending women for those roles. And 3, retention. A lot of students, while they wanted to exit, of course, after they spent a certain period of time, these women who came for these flexible roles, they stuck on. The retention rates were very, very high. So the business saw the benefit. So there's always this benefit. I think we can drive. It's I guess more conversations is important. And then 2, I think it's not just the CEO. I think that the next layer of the business leaders, you let them speak, you involve them from the start, you let them, HR doesn't have to take the stage. I think when they take the stage and then they embrace these efforts, they communicate success stories, I think automatically you have a buy-in from the leaders and then the CEO and things fall in place.
Sharan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, wonderful question, sir. Thank you so much. So we have got a system. I think the question is very relevant because it's very difficult to so-called change the orientation or train the CEOs. That's the, in a crude word. But I think what we have got in Tata Group, so we are having some initiative. One initiative which is relevant for today's discussion. So we call it Tata Affirmative Action Program. And Tata Affirmative Action Program talks about, how we can address discrimination through equity, inclusion, and diversity for women, for people with, lower social economic background, disability, and so on and so forth. So what we do, that a set of team, so we have got a criteria framework. We have got a framework. We train people to, do an assessment of the company on that framework. And a CEO typically becomes the mentor for that team. So I'm just giving an example. So recently we were having an assessment of affirmative action program of Tata Steel. Tata Steel is a big organization. They are doing tremendous amount of good work. I think LGBTQ, they have recruited almost like hundreds in number very recently. A very, very high level of inclusive culture in Tata Steel. But I think we made the CEO of Tata Power as a mentor who will be studying Tata Steel. So when the CEO engages very deeply with what the other company is doing, you don't have to tell them what they need to do. They just reflect, they just understand, and automatically I know that, tomorrow what Tata Steel is doing, it is going to happen in Tata Power. And this is, the way we have been sensitizing all the CEOs, on a particular initiative and all. So one way is, you can't have CEOs coming in the classroom and, being taught about what is diversity, what is inclusion. But I think this way we have found it to be a very, very effective way of doing it, engaging it, on some assignment which will give him introspection, reflection, and maybe going it back to their own organization and deploying many of the practices from there. So I thought it will be of some help.
Any more questions from the audience beyond Mr. Nagesh? Because I know he has done phenomenal work with the train organization. So any more questions for the panel? One last one from the audience. Yeah.
Fantastic panel, I think. Each one of you spoke very well. I just wanted to understand if you move diversity from people's culture to the businesses. So for example, in the product and services that all of you are into, how accessibility is for people with disability or people who are from the third gender or other minority groups. Is that also a discourse within your system?
Yeah, I'm okay to do that. And I also have a very strong urge of contributing to Nagesh's question as well. I think, and that will relate back to, sir, what you asked. Within IKEA, the hiring is based on values. It's very clear that we may have little bit plus and minus on the competence, but not on the values, just to ensure that whoever is entering the organization has the right mindset as what organization is, to not have the discord, to not align with the philosophy of the organization. Very recently, we were having a session from Peter Kamprad, son of Ingvar Kamprad, our founder, and he gave us a very simple example that he was looking at some of the CXO candidates for a critical position globally. And the way he assessed the individual was to invite them for lunch and gave him few potatoes to peel without a peeler. And he gave him a knife saying, why don't you try peeling and then let's cook together and eat together. And the candidate, not knowing how to peel the potato with a knife, took a good enough chunk of the pulp along with the peel, the skin, and pulled it out, which showed that you were firstly not in line with the value of cost consciousness and not with a very humble way of finding innovative ways of doing it in the absence of a peeler. And he said that I felt this person will not be able to work with the limited resources to work with our agenda, so it was a no. So simple things like these can also give you a little bit more insight in the candidate you want to bring in the organization to be aligned with your approach and everybody talking the same language. Coming to the business front, for us, I believe it's more than just going with the basic requirements, and hence we don't go with minimum wages, but we talk about living wages for everybody to have a decent living in wherever they are staying. And this is not only with us, as I mentioned, it is also a part of the complete supply chain that we work with. Because if you do not have those kind of ethical work practices, then we do not partner with you, which means that if you want to have business with us, you need to have a similar ideology to work with, which means that if we are auditing ourselves to ensure that we are meeting those criteria for having a fantastic workplace for our co-workers, it's the same for you as well as a business partner. And for us, we believe that our agenda goes through co-workers, our customers, and our supply partners. And that is exactly the reason whatever facilities the co-worker has is the same that we have for the customer, is the same that we have for the supply chain as well. But are we still there yet? No, we are not. We have a specific format, a concept that we follow in setting up our stores. Is there some more that we can do? Absolutely, yes. We are in the process, for example, our co-workers wear uniform when they are front-ending in the stores. We are looking at how do we make it inclusive. We were interviewing some of the trans candidates for a Mumbai store, and we know that they were not okay with probably the trousers. How do we change that? How do we have new forms coming in a uniform? Most of the girls, for example, may not be okay with having a shirt because they don't want their back to be seen. So we are looking at having tunics. How do we allow for hijab as a part of the uniform? How do we allow turbans as a part of the uniform? Are some of the discussions which is a daily process for us to think and mull over to find the right solution to be absolutely inclusive. Does it help business? Yes. Is it difficult to sell this concept? No. Because I am servicing as an organization, as a brand, multiple segments within the community because our vision is for the many. If it is for the many, I have to be one amongst the many. And then it is a very natural and default thought or a thinking to be inclusive and to be diverse if I have to be many. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, since there are so many people from Tata, I thought I should share with the audience two things. I was witness to a question being asked to Mr. Ratan Tata. You are in hundreds of businesses, how do you decide which business to get in? The answer he gave was so simple. He said, what is good for community is good for Tatas. It's a fabulous answer. And then as part of some journey, I was looking at all the purpose statements of organizations. There are not even 5% purpose statement of organization in the country which has the word inclusion. So to me, if these two things are done, what's good for the community is good for us. And in the purpose statement, an inclusion word is added, in whichever way. I think that will start making a change from top to down. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your insights, Mr. Nagesh, as usual. I think great panel. The summary, which we've all understood, of course, culture and what we spoke about, important sponsorship of leadership and leadership buy-in to start anything. I think there are various practices which were shared by these teams here. For the paucity of time, we will kind of close our sessions today. But thanks to the panel, thanks to all the panel members here. First of all, thanks to the RAI team for actually coming out of this theme and actually allowing the participation on a very contemporary topic of this kind. So thanks, Nagesh, and all of you from the RAI who have done this very impactfully. And this is the first and many of the first to come, many of the future Ekams to come. So thanks a lot for this forum as well. Thank you.